So, einen wunderschönen guten Abend hier im House of Switzerland zu einer für uns heute ganz, ganz besonderen Veranstaltung zum Thema Blockchain. Mein Name ist Britta Thiele-Klapproth. Ich kuratiere hier gemeinsam mit meinen Kolleginnen Claudia Jehle und Birgit Flachenecker heute Abend das Programm für Sie und heiße Sie ganz herzlich willkommen im House of Switzerland, was ich glaube, ein paar von Ihnen sehe ich zum ersten Mal. Wir sind recht regelmäßig hier. Wir sind auf der Zielgeraden mit diesem Projekt, was wir seit Anfang Juli erfolgreich begleiten. Wir haben dieses Haus initiiert mit der offiziellen Schweiz, mit Präsenz Schweiz. Es ist die Agentur für Landeskommunikation mit Schweiz Tourismus und Switzerland Global Enterprise. Wir verstehen uns als Ihre Wirtschaftsexperten und wollen Ihnen die Schweiz vor allem in technologischer Hinsicht etwas näher bringen. Warum haben wir uns zu diesem Schritt entschlossen? Was ist das Ziel? Wir waren mutig, dass in einer Pandemie, nicht wissend, ob die Stuttgarterinnen und Stuttgarter und die Baden-Württemberger uns annehmen und ob sie kommen. Und ich mag mit Fug und Recht behaupten, dass wir uns auf unsere Landsleute hier verlassen können. Wir hatten mehrheitlich wirklich volles Haus, dürfen verschiedenste Institutionen durchs Haus führen und haben so etwas zur Verbesserung und zur Intensivierung der wirtschaftlichen Beziehungen zwischen Baden-Württemberg und der Schweiz beigetragen. Ich möchte Sie ganz herzlich ermuntern, auch ins zukünftige Programm zu gucken. Wir haben noch einen heißen Oktober vor uns mit spannenden Events. Und before I switch to English, as you might know, the rest of the evening and the panel will be held in English. I am happy to pass over the mic to Mr. Claudio Tessone. Before I would say a very big thank you to Mr. Kasperger and his colleague from Blockchain Stuttgart, who really helped us tremendously for getting the importance and you here in the house. So thank you very much. Claudio, I might pass over the mic and wish all of us a very interesting and successful evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, people, for coming today to this event about blockchain in Switzerland and the advances that have been taking place in this field there. I am Professor for Blockchain and Distributed Ledger Technologies at the University of Zurich, and I am the chairman of the Blockchain Center. I will not bother you with a long introduction to the Blockchain Center. It is simply a very active research initiative at the University of Zurich, which prides itself for something that is fundamental to understand blockchains, which is interdisciplinarity. The University of Zurich is the one that offers the widest range of career paths for students in Switzerland, and this multidisciplinarity that characterizes our university is also present inside of the Blockchain Center. Simply because we consider that it is not possible to understand this new technology just looking at it as a technology. There are a lot of economic aspects, but also regulatory aspects that will also be a focus of the discussions today that are fundamental in order to fully fathom these systems. And I am also thankful, and there are two things. On the one hand, is that it is phenomenal to have a blockchain center in Switzerland because it is evincing a lot of innovation in this space, and this is also why I'm so happy to have so many representatives of very interesting projects, and they also joined the meeting today. I am also thankful to House of Switzerland here in Stuttgart for offering us the opportunity to present what we are doing and for you all to come today. Thank you very much. Malte.
Thank you, Claudio. Welcome to this evening. I have the honor to guide you through, and also welcome to the guys out there in the YouTube stream. If you have questions, please feel free to post them in the comment section. Let us just start into it. We have a dance program, and I'd like to welcome my first speaker here on the stage. He's a former professor of law at the University of Zurich and today the co-director of a research program on financial and market regulations, which he will talk about it. And he's as well the board member of the Swiss Blockchain Federation. Welcome on stage, Professor Rolf Weber, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be here and say a few words about the legal situation in Switzerland. Indeed, I also would have slides, if they can be displayed. Thank you very much. Law is usually a rather boring topic for many people, but law does have a function. It could give or not give legal certainty for business models, and I think that Swiss law has achieved a relatively good solution for blockchain business models. Crypto assets is the key term of my presentation, and as an introductory remark, I just would like to say that crypto assets or crypto economy does not equal fintech. On the one hand, fintech does not only encompass crypto assets, but also other digital business models. On the other hand, crypto assets extend over the scope of financial markets, for example, supply chain, etc. I will put my main emphasis on the crypto assets, but I'm going to start with a few remarks related to the fintech regulations in Switzerland. As a general remark, in Switzerland as well as in Germany, regulation concerns the market players and not transactions. And this causes, of course, immediate problems if we look at decentralized business models, because then we might have difficulties to find the market players. I'm not going to touch on KYC and AML, notwithstanding the fact that AML regulations are probably the most critical parts in the connection with the realization of crypto asset business models, and I will only say a few words about decentralized finance, since this issue is going to be touched upon by the following speakers. As I said, I would like to start with a few introductory remarks about fintech models in Switzerland. The Swiss regulations, in fact, mainly regulations and only to a very limited extent based on formal laws, is based on three pillars. In August 2017, the Federal Council has changed the ordinance relating to the banks and has prolonged the so-called deposit period for funds of customers from 7 to 60 days, and this has basically made it possible to establish crowdfunding platforms and several business models. Then we do have the Innovation Sandbox, allowing the providers to hold assets up to 1 million Swiss francs. And we have then finally, since January 2020, the so-called license light. That's a banking license in principle, but emphasis is put on light. The question is, of course, always what is light and what is not so light. In my opinion, it's unfortunately not very light, and somehow my perception is also reflected now in reality. So far, only 2 or 3 financial intermediaries have applied and successfully received the so-called banking license light. As far as the original tokens which have been issued in financial markets are concerned. The regulations are based on FINMA guidelines, again, not a formal law, and you are certainly aware of the fact that FINMA is distinguishing between the payment tokens, the utility tokens, and the assets tokens. It has added that we also are confronted with so-called hybrid tokens, and in reality, hybrid tokens are, maybe apart from cryptocurrencies, the most important form of tokens, and this leads, at least from a perspective of legal practice, to the problem that lawyers do have to qualify the hybrid tokens and have to decide whether hybrid tokens are rather asset tokens or utility tokens, eventually payment tokens. We know with our supervisory authority, the FINMA, a special institution, namely the FinTech desk, and it is possible to submit projects to this FinTech desk and ask for a so-called comfort letter expressing the perception of FINMA that a certain business model is not subject to regulation, but there are a couple of uncertainties linked to such kind of comfort letters. On the top of these guidelines, we also do have additional guidelines of September 2019 on stable coins. These guidelines have been issued subsequent to the application of Libra at that time to FINMA, and FINMA thought it would make sense to have some general guidelines, since Libra has first changed the character of the stable coin, then changed the name to Diem, and finally moved to the United States. The respective guidelines are more or less dead letters in Switzerland for the time being, and the interpretation of FINMA is so strict that we do not really have convincing stablecoin projects in Switzerland for the time being. As far as market situation is concerned, the ICO boom is over. We do have so-called STOs in the meantime, security token offerings, and this is mainly connected to the possibility to issue tokenized shares. I will come back to that. I'm very short because I'm not so much interested to dig too much now into the legal regulations. Coming from the side of a practicing attorney, apart from a function at the university, the main question, if a project is submitted to me, concerns the assessment of potentially applicable laws. And you can see from this slide, and by the way, I don't mind if the organizers are distributing my slides afterwards, that KYC AML is always a topic. As I said, I'm not going into the details, but I'm glad to say a few words if somebody has questions during the panel. Securities laws applies to asset tokens and very often to hybrid tokens, not so much to utility tokens. Banking laws is applicable only in very rare cases, and collective investment schemes laws are only applicable to crypto assets funds. And if you should be familiar with the US legal situation, Switzerland is never qualifying tokens as commodities. Much easier is the situation with the cryptocurrencies exchanges. Basically, only trading platforms need to get a license. Otherwise, either AML is applicable or no legal rules have to be observed, in particular for the private use of cryptocurrencies. And this leads me now to the second and more important part of my presentation, namely the so-called DLT law. Switzerland decided not to prepare a blockchain law, as for example Fürstentum Liechtenstein, but to change 10 existing laws by a so-called framework legal act, and I use now the abbreviated term of DLT law. Why did Switzerland need such kind of law for specific legal aspects? On the one hand, as in Germany, property law is not really applicable because property law is based on physical goods, on chattels, and data packages do not qualify as physical good. Then, in contrast to Germany, assignment in Switzerland must be done in writing, and this is another obstacle for DLT business models. In 2018, a task force of legal experts has submitted proposals to the Federal Council. The Federal Council has then issued a report in December 2018 and has outlined why Switzerland would go the way on a framework legal act and not on a blockchain act. This has been accepted in public in November 2019. The draft of the DLT law has been submitted, and surprisingly enough, almost like in communist parties, the law has not been changed by the parliament in any relative respect, and the law was adopted in September 2020 by unanimous vote. Therefore, I said it's like in a communist party. I've never seen in my long life as a legal person that the parliament unanimously adopted a law. As I said, the law changed 10 existing laws. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss all 10 laws. I have excluded AML regulations. I would like to go a little bit deeper on the new regulations on transfer of digital assets contained in our Code of Obligations. And I would also like to say a few words about DLT trading facilities. An important change is the amendment in the Debt Enforcement and Bankruptcy Act, because it is now possible since 1st of August to have a surrender of crypto-based assets, and by the way, and I would say also by coincidence, so an additional change in the bankruptcy of the holder of the assets. And if you have your crypto assets in a wallet with a provider and the provider falls bankrupt, you do have the possibility to get your crypto assets, so to speak, back. You have a claim on surrender if the crypto assets can be individually allocated. I mean, that's the easy case. But also, and this was a last-minute change done by the Federal Council, if in a common assets account a clear proportion of the assets is available. And this rule in the bankruptcy law does not only apply to crypto assets in the form of securities, but also to cryptocurrencies. And somehow I have the impression that most parliamentarians did not overlook the consequences, because, as you all know, money is lost if somebody falls bankrupt. You can never get your money back because money cannot be individually allocated. If you do have a cryptocurrency, all of a sudden you can have it surrendered. So cryptocurrencies in bankruptcy situations do even have now a privileged situation. As I mentioned, I would like to go a little bit further into the details of the transfer of digital assets. Traditionally, we had shares in physical form, and since 2008, we do have the so-called uncertificated securities. Switzerland was one of the very, very first countries having implemented such kind of law, namely the Federal Intermediated Securities Act, in German Bucheffektengesetz of 2008. However, this law is not really appropriate for digital assets because it requires essential registration of the assets, and by definition, blockchain DLT is decentralized, and therefore we have now the new ledger-based securities, or the so-called registered securities. Our code of obligations has been amended, and for example, it is now stated that a ledger-based security is a right which is registered in a securities ledger in accordance with the legal provisions, and may be exercised and transferred to others only via this securities ledger. And further on, the law explains which conditions must be complied with by the provider of this securities ledger. I'm not going into the details. Headings are integrity, transparency, obligations, etc. Standardization is desirable. Therefore, the Swiss Blockchain Federation has issued a circular on 1st of February, the day when the law came into force of this year. So you can go on the website of the Swiss Blockchain Federation and find this circular in German and in English language. And this circular contains a lot of details how this must be done. And from my perspective as a lawyer, I must say that's the most promising business model now for the last couple of months, because a number of companies tokenize their shares, and we also do have providers offering somehow the technical infrastructure for the securities ledger. We need more standardization in this field. That's obvious, but I think this will come, and maybe a final word to that. It is also possible to cancel the validity of a digital assets as the validity of a physical share certificate in the past. In other words, there's a special proceedings with a judge allowing to cancel the validity of a crypto assets. The next question is, of course, how this is then be transposed into the DLT, and how can the technical environment reflect the court decision, but possibly another speaker will go into the details here. Then the next important change is the possibility to get a license for so-called DLT trading facilities. The DLT trading facility is a commercially operated institution for multilateral trading of DLT securities, whose purpose is to simultaneously exchange and match bids of several participants under the condition that 1 out of 3 requirements is fulfilled, namely admission of participants, namely private persons, or DLT securities are held in a central custody based on uniform rules, and or clearing settlement of transaction with DLT securities is possible. I'm not digging too much now in the details. This part of the law came into force on 1st of August, so about 2 months ago. FINMA has issued very lengthy guidelines. This is, of course, helpful for the lawyers, but it is an obstacle for business people. I doubt that many operators are trying to get this kind of license, and SIX, through the subsidiary of Swiss Digital Exchange, has also gone for, so to speak, a normal license and not for a DLT license. Nathan Kaiser might say a few words to that afterwards. So in principle, we would have a good legal framework, but the level of the requirements is too high. The law foresees the possibility that a license light could be granted to a so-called small DLT trading facility, but again, the thresholds are so low that practically every halfway successful operator would exceed the thresholds and would have then to apply for a normal license. And for this reason, I'm convinced that we will have many alternative DLT trading systems of operators who are not really willing to comply with the strict regulations of our financial market infrastructure law. As far as this part of secondary trading is concerned, we again do have a circular in English language of the Swiss Blockchain Federation, if you are interested to learn more about that. This brings me to the outlook. I think Switzerland does have a reasonable law. Not everything is really ideal, but overall, I think the quality is quite good. And by the way, our legal provisions to the transfer of registered securities is much more broader and much more liberal than the recently changed German law in this respect. However, we do not have enough business models. So for once, I can say, a lawyer, please speed up, business people. We do not have to change now the law, but we need more business models to be implemented. Secondly, I'm not underestimating the restrictions imposed on business models by the AML regulations and also by the very, very recent trends to more strongly regulate blockchain participants' identification. Background is payment of cryptocurrencies in order to release blocked accounts, random sum, etc. And finally, just to build a bridge to the panel discussion, decentralized finance is nice. It's in the mouth of everybody, but I'm convinced that traditional financial services, digital services will survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rolf, very much for your nice introduction into the regulatory frameworks which are already set in place in Switzerland. And I also like to welcome our next guest on the stage, who will present the implementation of a regulated market. And he calls himself a geek lawyer. He worked for 20 years in China. He's a board member in several boards, as well as the Cardano Foundation and a general counsel of SDX, which is the digital exchange which provides is one of the first regulated digital market places in well, let's say the world, but at least in Switzerland. So welcome, Nathan Kaiser.
Hi everybody. I do see the advantage of the standing pult now, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, welcome everybody. I think most of you are not lawyers and not capital market specialists, so I'm probably going to start out by Adam and Eve a bit and talk about SDX. I don't have slides. I'm going to speak freely with a bit of notes. It's not going to last 20 minutes. Why? Because at SDX, what are we actually doing, or who are we? We are a 100% subsidiary of SIX, of the Swiss Stock Exchange. And as thus, our clients, or our immediate clients, we call them members, are banks. So it's not retail. So this already is helpful for you to understand that when we talked about the headline, first regulated stock exchange based on DLT, it gets very tricky once you dig down. It's not something that will immediately touch retail clients or you. What SIX does, and then by extension SDX, and I'll come to that, is that SIX is providing the infrastructure to the capital markets, or capital market infrastructure. SIX provides the piping for the banks when it comes to securities and others. Here I want to pick up a little bit on what my colleague just said. I'm going to make the distinction a little bit simpler, which is in crypto digital assets, for simplicity for you, it's either a security or it's not, to make it very simple. And what we do at SDX today is securities, so Effekten. So that means that when it comes to crypto assets or cryptocurrencies, which are not securities, whatever they are, this is something that's on our roadmap, but it's not something that we're doing right now. So we are not what you understand as a crypto exchange. We're a crypto-based or DLT-based stock exchange or securities exchange. What does that mean? We just got the license a couple of weeks ago, and again, as Dr. Weber has pointed out, we actually aimed, and I have to go back 3 years, for a old, I call it old because it's a bit old, traditional stock exchange license under the, I say old again, old Swiss law. So we're not yet talking about the DLT law. And why did we do that? I think a bit of history is important, because SIX 3 years ago started to say we should interrupt ourselves or disrupt ourselves before somebody else disrupts us. And so they set up SDX, and at that time, effectively, the DLT law was in discussion and in preparation, but it wasn't out yet. And so I think very classically, we at SDX/SIX, we have, and that's my own words, a first mover disadvantage. No, we were too quick, too fast, with too much. And so what we have now is pretty, I think actually the occurrence in time is really very close. Us getting the license and the new law entering into force shows us that, okay, now we got the license in the classic security world, and that's something, however, let me explain what that something is. So what do we actually do? When we say DLT based, what does that mean for us? It means that we run a private blockchain based on Corda R3 on our well, let's say we could run our own DLT, and because our members/clients are the banks, each bank that becomes a member of SDX, just like in the old system, the members become a member of SIX, each such bank then gets a node in our network. And so the assumption of this current model is that we are growing the blockchain from very small to bigger by going into the banks. And as you can tell, and again, we talked about, or Dr. Weber, you talked about business models. I thought that was very important. The question of business model is really, really important, because we do see that this is one approach, but it's only one, because we know that within 3 years, public blockchains and the DLT law, so both the technology, let's put the scaling on the side, the technology and the law has moved forward, but so has business. And we now do have Ethereum-based bonds. We don't have many of them, but we have a couple of them. Yeah. And so this is not yet what we do. Rather, what we do is we take a security, we make it a intermediated or uncertificated security, eine Bucheffekte, that runs on our blockchain. Now the question is, why would you do that? No, why? We do that because the one pain point that we wanted to address, or we want to address, is the clearing and settlement, which is let's call it an information mess between all the banks and the CSD, the Central Security Depository. And that mess has been addressed over the past, probably, let's say, 100 years. It used to be that by BIC in Zurich and in Frankfurt and in Stuttgart, you know it exactly. They used to buy bike at the end of the day, run around with a big bag, and then say like, oh, you know, our Mr. Meyer at our bank sold 10 shares to your Mrs. Müller at your bank, and that didn't really scale so well. And then we got, of course, we did the step in Switzerland very early to at least digitalize the mess, but it's still a very complex system. And so the idea is to use the blockchain not in the sense of transfer a value such as you do in a cryptocurrency, but use the blockchain for information coordination. I think maybe Professor Tessone, I don't know where here, you can probably talk a lot more about that. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is not transfer values, but we're trying to coordinate information being which share is with which bank and with which final customer on the blockchain, and have that coordination problem addressed. What does that mean? Now you're like, okay, that was complicated. What does that really mean? In the US, which is obviously a bigger market when it comes to security, they solved it differently. The current solution is different than from Switzerland because it's a bigger market, more stakeholders, more players, different system. What they have is what's in the industry called T+5. And T+5 means that at the moment where Mr. Meyer and Mrs. Miller on their two different banks, when they bought and sold the whatever shares, it will take 5 days until that final information has arrived at both banks and the custodians, let's say custodians. So it takes 5 days to settle and clear. In Switzerland, we're a bit faster. I think because, again, the Swiss technological solution has been very good, and so it's a pain point that has been addressed partially during the past 20 years. So what we have in Switzerland is we have T+2, 2 days. I don't even know what it is in Germany. And by the way, somebody here from the Börse Stuttgart, because I'm also a big fan, because the Börse Stuttgart is doing a lot of stuff in crypto, which we think is really cool. Close that bracket. So with blockchain, arguably, you will go from T+5 to T+2 to T+? Because what we have seen, and then it gets really tricky, and I'm not going to totally go down that rabbit hole, the T+0, or often referred to as atomic settlement that the blockchain allows, sounds extremely sexy on paper and in a bar, but it becomes very difficult to implement in the real capital markets because it raises the issue of pre-funding. Yeah, I think you're definitely a banker here in the middle, or a capital markets guy. Yeah. Okay. So we're actually now at SDX because we went that extra mile and we are technically able to do T+0. We realized like, oh wait, maybe that's not, maybe it was a feature, not a bug. Everybody thought it was a bug and not a feature, but maybe it's a feature, not a bug. And what that leads me to is that at SDX and at 6, being very early in the market, it's not at all that we have all the answers. It's more that we discovered a lot of the questions, which is a good start, yeah. And I could probably go, let me just take quick. And of course, yes, we're looking at the DLT law and very much agree with you. It's the new DLT law, as alluring as it is and as well as it works, and also the trading facility, of course, we're actually also thinking that, oh wait, let's think twice before we go there, because the commercial let's say, feasibility is not a given between costs and revenues. And in the end, you said entrepreneur, I think many of you are entrepreneurs, it's not what's technically or legally / regulatorily possible automatically makes money, So the business model is one of these big or several question marks that we have. Right, I think with this I would like to conclude. I don't want to make this too long because I'm very much looking forward to, you already made the remark, Dr. Weber, that the decentralized finance. And I would go a step further coming from SDX, the decentralized exchanges. How does that work with us? Because obviously you can tell if you're SIX/SDX, you're sort of the flagship of all centralization. So it's the exact opposite of what actually the big D and DLT stands for, whether it's distributed or decentralized. And I'm personally a fan of the big D. It often gets forgotten. It's not technology for the technology's sake or regulatory sake. It's why are we doing decentralization? I'm very much looking forward to the panel. And we ourselves at SDX are thinking, wait, so we're the very, very highly centralized piping provider. How is that going to work out in the long term? Another question mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, our next guest, he's one of the, he managed large caps for 20 years at JP Morgan, so he has a huge background in traditional corporate finance, which will, I guess, somehow conclude with the thinking of how is SDX doing. And then he founded a company in the nutrition sector, so he's an entrepreneur by heart as well, like many of you, as we heard. And before he then founded CVVC in 2018, which is an investment firm for blockchain startups. And I guess you will show us, Olaf Hannemann, what kind of business models are out there and what the young entrepreneurs or old entrepreneurs bring on the stage. Thanks.
Exactly. Thank you, Malte, and thank you all for being here and the interest. So I want to do a bit of a detour as to why is this all happening in Switzerland? You know, how come there's this very active environment there? What is important for a functioning startup ecosystem in a particular technology space? And then talk a little bit about us and the focus areas and use cases we see through blockchain technology. 960, that's the number of startups and businesses that deal directly or in part indirectly with blockchain technology in Switzerland. Pretty big number. All the data, by the way, is from February this year. It's relevant later on some of the stats. The industry employs 5,200 people, roughly, which for a country like Switzerland is a very meaningful number, in particular in a growth sector. And we have 11 unicorns in country, i.e. those are companies or blockchain protocols, level 1, that have either a valuation or a market cap of the token of over 1 billion. When we look at the 50 largest projects that are domiciled in Switzerland, and arguably this whole industry, as many other startup industries, is a very international and decentralized place. So we have a lot of projects that are domiciled in Switzerland with a very international footprint, developers elsewhere. Sometimes it's only a foundation, sometimes it's a lead team that is there, and sometimes it's the entire company that is in Switzerland. But if you look at the top 50 projects, you come to a value of 250 billion. Now this is per February. And given we have Ethereum and Cardano and Tezos in there, I didn't do the math, but it's everybody's guess what this number is. I would say it's for sure double right now, right? Feels like it could be double right now. So these are both protocols, but also private companies, projects that had financing rounds with venture capital. So why is this all happening? And by the way, the distribution of these projects and startups is, and that's why we call, so when we say Crypto Valley, we actually mean Switzerland plus Liechtenstein. We also think that the heart of Crypto Valley is in Zug, because that's where most of the projects are. But clearly there's a lot of other relevant regions like Zurich, Geneva and the Welsh region, as well as Ticino, and then Liechtenstein as a relevant hub as well, and a little bit of a gateway into the EU, and also, you know, obviously on the legal side, very interesting jurisdiction. Now, how come, right? How is this all happening? And if you do a little bit of a history, very big picture, essentially, it started with early projects and leaders. So you had Bitcoin Suisse, established relatively soon after obviously Bitcoin came about. And then I would say one of the key elements was Ethereum, looking for a home for their foundation, looking at various different countries and ultimately deciding on Switzerland. And to us, that was really kind of a big move to signal to the ecosystem, this is a place where it makes sense for the tech and the thought leaders to call that their home. And then you kind of couple that with a very open-minded policy, both in the canton, but then also over time in Bern, and an interest of politics and policy makers in innovation and wanting to understand the innovation and then also wanting to work with all these people to establish an ecosystem that has the right framework to support these startups, which then ended ultimately in the Swiss Blockchain Federation. And initially there was a task force, and then ultimately in the Swiss Blockchain Federation, which worked towards all the legal framework, but also other topics that we heard about before. There's other elements that I think may be less relevant in a way, but send a big signal to a startup community. So if you're the canton of Zug and you're accepting Bitcoin relatively early on for capital contribution in a startup, not a lot of people may do that in the startup world, but it sends a signal. And the signal is we're open for you and we're open and interested in you. And the same is true when you accept today Bitcoin for tax payments. And the same is true when the former president of Switzerland joins the board, namely ours, of a young VC that invests in other VCs, right? Imagine Angela Merkel joining the board not of High-Tech Gründer Fund, but of a young VC that invests in blockchain startups. So that all of these things, I think, send signal, and hence an ecosystem builds and exists. So you need all of this, the infrastructure, the politics, financial market, banks need to be open. This was a challenge for quite a while, and sometimes still is, for young startups that deal in blockchain and crypto to open bank accounts, but we have some. You need risk capital, funding for those startups. You need the science, and you need industry that is also relevant and export-oriented and innovation-oriented. And obviously in Switzerland you have a lot of leading industries that, Switzerland, as many of you know, innovation country #1 for the last 10, 12 years. So there is kind of a DNA also in large industry, be that in pharma or consumer or elsewhere, for innovation. So a lot of pilot project opportunities. The startups actually should be in the center or at the top. So you need the startups to come to the country, service providers, legal, infrastructure, co-working spaces, network where startups can meet, and all of that then contributes to a functioning ecosystem. What's our role as CVVC is we're an investor plus is kind of our approach. So we want to invest and fund young blockchain startups, but we believe that the future of venture capital is more than that, i.e., how can you help young startups grow and prosper through additional services and creating this ecosystem without spoon-feeding them at the same time? And that's what we're doing through the other businesses. So the investment side is CVVC. We have a small advisory team connecting startups and the corporate world, also working with other stakeholders, with the cantons and so on and so forth. We have co-working spaces. Biggest hub is in Zug, with 150 tenants that are all blockchain-related projects. Some of the big protocols have their home there. And you already see from that, if you have 150 tenants and blockchain startups, and at the same time you incubate and work with young startups, they have a network immediately of other projects and players where they can share resources, best practices, so on and so forth. We run startup competitions and events to provide the startups kind of a framework to meet other people. Our focus on blockchain investment is actually not crypto, but it's startups that use the technology to build applications. I want to give a few examples from that. I start with one from Stuttgart. So this is Asven. They cybersecurity startup for IoT devices. Basically what they're doing is automated software updates onto IoT devices, running a test that the software actually works, and having a timestamp and a track and trace blockchain solution to prove that the software has happened. You can imagine autopilot in a car, any machine, there's an issue, you want to make sure whose fault it is, and through that there's a proof that it was not, that there's not the recent software update on there. Various applications from pharmaceutical to industry 4.0, machines and automotive industry. Fun fact, there's more Bordeaux being sold in China than produced in France. Okay, we have a startup from Georgia, the country, not the state, that works with wineries to track and trace the authenticity of wine from the winery to the consumer. They now actually, and some people chuckle then too because they think it's not a big industry, they now have extended that to other industry. One, for example, is hazelnut. It's a massive industry, by the way, hazelnut industry. So nut industry is another case where, you know, the whole topic of where's the supply coming from, is it green, and so on and so forth. But wine industry from Georgia. This is an interesting one. This is a startup that is originally from Bulgaria, who moved to Switzerland to internationalize and reach out to publishing houses. So basically, they are taking the middleman out of digital advertising. And they're ensuring through blockchain that the ad that you're serving through kind of a direct connection with the publisher gets actually served at the addresses and on the devices that are targeted. So taking middlemen out of digital advertising through blockchain technology. Verein startup from Zug, think of achieving the same legal certainty through an email as a signed for letter, eingeschriebener Brief, as a form of email enabled through blockchain technology. And the last one, we liked that one obviously in the last couple of days with Facebook being down. This is a startup from Egypt that is a new messenger service where one, no data gets collected, and two, if I'm connected with Nathan, I'm 100% sure it's Nathan, and we're only connecting, and all of our communication is essentially secured through blockchain, and our identity is secured through blockchain. So no fake IDs can just send me a message and pretend they're Nathan. In total, we've done 32 investments in 18 startups, 32 investments into startups from 18 different countries and 4 different continents. Some of them come to Switzerland because they see the benefits. Others need to stay in the region because their end market is very relevant in the region. And all of those are essentially industrial, finance, gig economy, healthcare, life sciences type of use cases, actually, rather than crypto projects. With that, So, thank you. So if you're interested in learning more about the use cases, the startups, come talk to us, and happy to share thoughts, and looking forward to the panel later on. There you go.
Thanks, Olaf, for showing us what's possible with CVC, and especially in the Crypto Valley. Our next speakers are a hybrid presentation right now, right? Welcome on stage, Domino Burki. He has an academic background in law. He is the treasurer of Cardano Foundation, not Cardano itself, the Cardano Foundation, and sees himself as the interface between traditional finance and new technologies. We also have, in the ether, Mark Berger. Can you hear us? Just a small technical check. He has been at Von Tobel, and he saw the corporate finance world and launched one of the first regulated products there and found several companies in the past. Yeah, Mark, at least we can see you in the small window. That's good. And he can hear us. Can you hear us? Yes. Can we hear him?
I can hear you.
Yes, perfect. Thanks. Hi, Mark. And he's currently he's the president of OCOM FI, a decentralized launchpad built for Cardano. I'm looking forward to your introduction there.
Thank you so much, Malte. Thanks a lot. Mark, did you realize that the Cardano Foundation has still not made it on Olaf's milestone map? But I'm happy to see that you are not there either. So a treasurer never belongs on stage. He should be somewhere hidden and counting whatever. But who could resist an invitation from Claudia Tessone to come here and see you? But now you have to deal with me, but only for 5 minutes, then I'm preparing the grounds for you, Mark. So who are we? And I think we need to go back to the presentation. Thank you so much. We're a blockchain. Cardano is maybe known to many of you. We are a so-called third generation blockchain, and we're open for everyone. So basically, we're a blockchain for everyone. We're open source, and we're permissionless. And in the end, what we want is we want to achieve the utmost scalability, interoperability, and sustainability needed for large-scale and mission-critical applications, which is a great aim. Great goal to go for. Some might know that we have a native asset that is called ADA. And with ADA, we are currently the number 3 seen from market capitalization as blockchain. So we are an ecosystem that is not fully decentralized. Until it's fully decentralized, Cardano is driven by 3 organizations, 3 guardians. One of them is the Cardano Foundation, and the other one is, most important, is input-output. Input-output is the core developer. Some of you might have heard the name Charles Hoskinson. And then there's the Japanese company called Emurgo, and they're actually mainly for business adoption is their responsibility. So we're very proud that on September 12th, we finally achieved the so-called smart contracts capability. And with this smart contracts capability, finally, all those developers can start building their dApps on the Cardano blockchain. About the Cardano Foundation, we're Swiss-based, that's why we're here. And obviously, we do oversee the Cardano protocol and the use cases, and this is nice. We aim to build the financial and social infrastructure of the future. We're small, but still we're kind of organized. And now a little bit to prepare the discussion from afterwards. What is DeFi? DeFi is obviously a term that is known to many of you. It's so-called a variety of financial applications that use smart contracts to allow autonomous execution on open blockchain networks. Thereby, they supplant more and more traditional financial and banking services. It's decentralized. It does actually mean that no centralized institutions are needed. It is transparent and auditable. It's permissionless. Because you don't need a bank account to participate, and that's probably one of the biggest advantages that we offer, or a blockchain or DeFi offers. And it's low cost, it's affordable. Keep in mind that multi-billion dollar transaction costs less than $1 on a blockchain. And I think that's what we are aiming for. We are aiming for fair, transparent, and affordable forms of financial applications. So examples are decentralized exchanges, decentralized launchpads, like we will hear from Mark later. It's about lending, borrowing. It's about yield farming, liquidity mining. It's about staking. Some might have you heard of from staking. It's kind of lending out and getting interest. And as well, the term stablecoins might be as well known to many of you. A little bit of advertisement, DeFi powered by Cardano. Why Cardano? Because Cardano has some unique functionalities to offer. One of them is for the developers is the so-called Plutus playground and the Plutus programming language, which is based on Haskell. The other one is for non-programmers, and that's the drag and drop interface that is called Marlow. So you can drag and drop smart contracts and thereby don't need to be a developer in order to start using smart contracts. And then, very important for the adoption, there's the so-called KEVM, is for Ethereum Virtual Machine Environment to offer Solidity, which is a language, a programming language that is mainly used on Ethereum, but as well on other blockchains, can then be used as well on Cardano. There is a decentralized fundraising project called Catalyst, and in the end, it's now scalability that we are offering and sustainability. That's proof of stake. Our consensus mechanism is probably the most environmental friendly because it doesn't need that much power as, for example, the proof of work. And we have this fascinating trees project currently with a partner. We calculated that we need to plant 250,000 trees in order to get carbon neutral. We have already funds for 300,000 trees now, so we might get carbon positive at some point. And of course, interoperability is key as well. So what's the challenge with DeFi to get to the topic and as well to prepare our discussion afterwards? Cardano is here for everyone. We're hosting everyone here. It's consumers and providers, so we need to protect everyone. And the thing that we mainly have as the host for everyone is some form of reliability, that we don't allow Ponzi schemes or too many of them. So the lack of regulation is a challenge for all participants. That's really a challenge. So our mission is as well from the Cardano Foundation side is to shape legislation and help policymakers, lawmakers and regulators to find ways how we can actually integrate blockchain into the legacy systems. So we do feel certain responsibility here. We do not just provide the technology and do whatever you want. No, it's a form of responsibility that we have. So what do? We support the so-called real finance, and this is the DeFi applications, all of these various DeFi applications, and based on a so-called digital identity. You know who is behind, you know who is the participant, as well as, of course, all the regulations, as mentioned by some of my colleagues before. It's about AML and KYC regulations and many others, but AML and KYC being the most important ones in this context. And this is very known, we are very academic, research oriented and peer reviewed as a blockchain. So we've always understood that despite the fact that we are slow, we have a tradition for delay, but still if we arrive there, it has to work out. So better, it takes a bit longer, but then in the end it should function. We see a tremendous value in actually cooperating with academic partners like the University Blockchain Center, University of Zurich Blockchain Center, and we actually understand that they are best in education, and education is needed. Education is needed all over in the traditional world for all the youngsters that come up and want to understand about what is a blockchain for, and as well for us to understand how do we actually regulate ourselves, how do we better regulate ourselves. And therefore, to understand about how we should regulate ourselves, we really are grateful to valuable first movers. And one of these most valuable first movers in our ecosystem is Occam, and thereby I would like to hand over to Mark.
Romeo, thank you very much. Before I dive too much into it, I like to spend 2 minutes of the past so that you get a good view of where this is coming from. So let's say 6 years ago, I helped the bank called Vontobel to create the trading desk and custody Bitcoin. We were the very first bank that was able to custody Bitcoin in an insured way. The product that we created out of this was a Bitcoin certificate tracker that was issued among the nine relevant derivatives exchanges in Europe. And that product had a really big success. However, with blockchain, you can do much more than just create some derivatives. That's why I soon thereafter left the bank to have a real footprint in crypto. What I created after that was a company called Scalable Solutions. It basically took over a cryptocurrency exchange technology that was around since 2012 and was able to scale to a few million users. However, the problem with the crypto to crypto exchange is that it didn't fit any type of regulation that would be needed and especially needed nowadays as regulation is getting more strict. So what we did with that technology is we certified it in terms of security with known ISO certifications or for the US, the so-called SOC 2 certification, and we worked with new clients across the globe to get regulatory approval and the needed licenses. Fast forward today, this company is running more or less 30 exchanges globally, including regulated venues in the US, regulated venues in jurisdictions such as Malta or Japan, and so forth and so on. But the main learning that came out of working or creating this company is that a lot of the trading volume is moving to DeFi protocols. So maybe 2-3 years ago, we started seeing that with a very simple line of code, people would start exchange tokens in a trustless way. And we were investing in analyzing and understanding that very deeply and figuring out if there is a future for these types of transactions. Then roughly 2 years ago, we started seeing that the volume of these transactions is really growing. And today we see that the volume is still growing and is actually pretty large. So for instance, an application like Uniswap has a staggering amount of TVL or funds that are deposited into the protocol so that people can freely exchange those tokens based on a mathematical outcome. So it's basically taking away the middleman or the trusted party that we all know and we all value in financial services to do such a transaction. Therefore, it can lower the cost in a magnificent way, and it takes away all those pain points about trading, opening hours, etc., because it just runs 24/7, and you can definitely get an expected outcome by trusting that code. And from that learning, we were questioning ourselves if the traditional setup, how a financial service tied to an exchange that is centralized with a matching engine and an order book, really is going to have a future in 10 or 20 years from now. So that's why we got involved in decentralized finance. And the result is the OpenFi protocol. The OpenFi protocol was the fastest unicorn ever created in Swiss startup history. So as soon as we launched and we opened trading on a decentralized exchange, the token value shoot up, and we had a fully diluted market capitalization of far over $1 billion at the time. But more importantly is the vision that we have. So the vision that we have for building this protocol is that we can challenge existing primary markets and existing secondary markets with one trusted protocol. And the way we do it is that we still have elements that people can verify what is going on. So for instance, the tokens that we launch, we have a due diligence team that sort of runs the verification on those tokens, and people can only buy it in a whitelisted area where they need to be KYC'd in order to proceed this transaction. There is other DeFi protocols out there that do not do that, but we believe like in the long term, that's not going to be feasible. And we're focusing on the Cardano ecosystem because it's an environmentally friendly ecosystem. And we believe that the proof of stake set up as a consensus mechanism has a lot of potential going forward. So far, what have we done for the Cardano ecosystem? So the protocol has been launched roughly 6 months ago. The idea is brewing a bit longer. And the development to sort of set it up, started very late last year, early this year. And we had a very successful launch after that. We're launching right now probably 2 projects per week. So there's just quite some deal flow going through our primary market offerings. And it seems like that we could increase that. For now, the focus is only on cryptocurrency infrastructure projects that benefit the Cardano blockchain. But I believe with some time, we will also be able to have a challenge for the existing primary markets that are out there with financing for public goods or any type of financial instrument, etc. But the challenge still is that on the regulatory side, there will be need for more clarity. So far we're okay offering utility tokens, but there is many more classifications of tokens that you could offer on a service like this. But the regulatory clarity for those is not given at this point in time. That's more or less what Occam is doing.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction here. To Occam, a real application on the blockchain itself. For the next topic now, I'd like to welcome our guests who talked about the academic view on the regulations down to the usages and the ecosystems here on stage. Welcome Nathan Kaiser, Rolf Weber, please, Olaf Hannemann, Claudio Tessone, and Domino Burki. And remotely, remotely, we will also have Professor Dr. Thorsten Hens, as well as Mark Berger. Is Thorsten, can you hear us? Is he also there?
Yes, perfect.
Till he connects, I will introduce him. He is a professor for banking and finance in Lucerne, as well as in Bergen, Norway. And he co-founded a spin-off at the University of Zurich, which is called Behavioral Finance Solutions. But most importantly, he's the co-founder of the Swiss FinTech Innovations, which is an independent association of Swiss financial institutions. At least we can see you, Thorsten.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
You forgot to mention that I'm a professor at the University of Zurich.
I'm sorry, yes, you're right. Let's start with the big question about, what we are talking about DeFi and CeFi back and forth, but let's start with defining DeFi. We heard some definitions today, but maybe one question to you, Thorsten, first. From a behavioral science point of view, why do we need DeFi? Why do we need some decentralized finance at all?
That's a good question. So finance is about trust, and the question is whether people trust more in an algorithm or into people. So this is still to be seen.
Sorry, it's still to be seen if
whether people trust more into algorithms than in people. So when you do lending on the decentralized finance platform, for example, there are no people, right?
Question to the technical guys more. Are you doing?
I'm certainly the least technical person. Gives me great advantage. Okay. It's not only about that, I believe, which is obviously true, sorry, but efficiency. This is as well about efficiency. It's a completely new dimension of efficiency, which makes it possible, you know, to lower, tremendously lower cost, speed, 24 hours, 7 days, 365 days. It really, yeah, that's one aspect that I think is important as well.
Yeah, to me, it's whenever you have a system where you can take middlemen out, makes the system more efficient. That's one. And then let's just throw one out there. Companies need new ways to fund themselves because banks neither want to lend nor take money. Right? The bank business model has changed significantly in that they don't like to take cash, nor do they like to lend, because both of those are, you know, kind of loss leaders to get to other service businesses. Hence, how do you make that whole market more efficient or replace certain service providers?
Okay. Roll first. Not on.
Well, another thing is transparency, you know, because right now the intermediaries that we have are, let's say, banks is obviously one of them, or banks are obviously one of them. These banks are subject to disclosure and transparency with tons of rules, and obviously the regulator who says you need to disclose this, and it's an annual report here, an annual report there. But the truth is, it's to a very, very large extent what happens within a bank is just is in a black box. And we've seen that in banking failures, which we obviously haven't stopped. No, we haven't been able to prevent banking failures. And it's probably mission impossible to even to try. And so when everything becomes transparent, that's not just the good on its own, but there's also the problem of counterparty risk. And we've seen that with, that's not a bank, Evergrande, but in China, but banks do fail and counterparties do fail. And in DeFi, you at least partially don't really have that counterparty risk because you don't have a counterparty.
Well, at the beginning you were asking for technical people's statements, and I'm not a technical person. I can just throw into the discussion that DeFi very obviously challenges the existing regulatory regime in almost all countries, because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, in principle, the intermediaries are directed by regulatory burdens and licenses regimes, etc. And if we do have a DeFi, we will hardly find many intermediaries which can be regulated. I'm not saying that DeFi is bad for such a reason, but it will somehow necessitate the rethinking of regulators, and as I said, all around the world.
Just to clarify, I especially pick up Thorsten's answer here. He says it must be seen if we trust technology more than we trust, let's say, people. What is it about you? I mean, Claudio, do you trust technology more? I mean, as the chairman of the Blockchain Center, you obviously have to, or is it, how do you see it?
I think that it boils down to the, I mean, trusting technology by itself is not necessarily a good strategy in life. What I would what I would say, however, is what was said before. I think that once you have transparency done in the right way and you are able to extract the middlemen from many of these processes, I think that this is a different kind of game. Moreover, I think that the important thing is also understanding which are the actual economic functioning of what you are doing, the incentives that you are placing on the different stakeholders that you are putting inside of a marketplace is something that you can also look into and make much more informed decisions of what you're going to do. And I think that all the situation boils down as well at the end to the answer to these 3 points.
Okay.
So from my side,
Mark, yeah.
I can say I've worked in banks for many years, and what we do in a bank is we're putting out the fires every day of transactions that don't go through and many new problems, and we update the systems according new rules that we need to implement. And as Nathan said, there is a general duty of reporting stuff, but it's not really reporting who has sent which transaction to whom. So on a blockchain today, you can use something called the Block Explorer. That's like the Google of the blockchain, and you can see every transaction from where it originated to whom it went, when it went, how much was sent, all those types of things. So it's enabling a lot of transparency. And if you then can trust that you're sending a transaction and you know the output of that transaction, what is going to happen before you're sending it, that is a great value proposition. And when we get to that point that the masses or the normal user understands the output of the transaction he's doing, then this will be far better than the current system. Right now, the truth is that there is a theoretical output, but sometimes there's ways to hack it. And I mean, you have probably seen in the news, there's Google DeFi hacks. There are a few. And there's probably every month there's one or two that are major. So the biggest one I've seen recently was 611 million stolen out of a DeFi protocol that was audited as well. So there is still some work to do on the DeFi front before we're ready for mass adoption. But once we get to a point that DeFi is being integrated into applications such as e-banking that we use to move our money, and we don't even need to think, but we just do the transaction and we know what is going to happen without the transaction being stuck, then we'll have a value proposition that no one can resist. And as always in disruptive technology, for something to take over and to take the masses, it needs to be at least 10 times better than the existing stuff that is around. And I think DeFi has the chance to get there.
So I agree with that. I think it needs something else, which is user-friendly interfaces. Because one of the challenges, right, is, I mean, on that question, do you trust code more than people? People are people. Right? And to understand that technology is super complex and potentially you don't need to. I was just thinking, do I understand why we can live stream Mark online through the internet and how that works? No, but I trust the fact that he just spoke live somewhere in Switzerland and he's there, right? I don't fully understand how that works. So, but I trust the interface. So I think it's that industry needs to get, the industry, i.e. us, need to get a little bit of the high horse of technology into how can we create user-friendly interfaces that people start to trust more than old interfaces.
Can I say something complementary to what Mark was saying, what Nathan was saying before, and what you just said? It's trust and transparency also. There is an important aspect in blockchains, that is the notion of identity. In general, blockchains, when they were conceived in the 29th, people wanted to have a source of an anonymous payment system. But think of the oxymoron almost. You are creating an eternal ledger that you cannot modify, and you pretend that this is going to be anonymous forever. And actually, blockchains that are not conceived with anonymity in mind are very bad at preserving the anonymity of the people, because you can always learn a lot about the activities of the different agents inside of the systems. Blockchain forensics is something very interesting, also what Mark was saying before. And actually a way of coming back to trust is what Nathan was also saying in his own implementation of the SDX, is we know all the parties that are there. Identities are a very important concept. Mark was also mentioning the importance of identity as well in his own solutions. KYC is also going to be important in this kind of systems. And I think that this is also, this is what you just said, is we know Mark is there because we see him, we know his identity, and identity is also going to be an important role in also bringing transparency and trust on these platforms as well.
May I, some paradigm shifts just take time to happen. We were born and raised with centralized models and institutions. So how could we now already trust the decentralized ones? This takes time. We will need to understand it a bit technically, not totally, of course, I fully agree. Otherwise I couldn't operate my mobile phone even. And then it will slowly and firmly be a concept that we accept, that decentralization for whatever reasons is probably much better than a centralized institution that you could actually visit or believe in.
Okay, understood. But then let's move on for the question on regulations. So we heard of the challenges. We have technical. We need interfaces. We need more trust. Who brings the trust in? Is it just simply setting up nice interfaces, or bringing? Or what else do we need there? Is there something educational, or is it regulational? How do you feel? Maybe Rolf.
Yeah, perhaps looking from a historical, also from a quite a general perspective, our discussion has recalled in my mind a debate which we already had almost 20 years ago. Lawrence Lessig framed the famous sentence, "Code is law." And he said, we have markets, we have norms, we have social behavior, but we have architecture, namely code. And everybody somehow was arguing, well, that's the future, the code. But in his second edition of the book, he said, well, we have to see that the code is not coming into the wrong hands. If we only have a few big private companies, for example, implementing digital rights management systems, then it's maybe not the ideal situation for society. So, in principle, code and trust must remain to a certain extent in the hand of regulators, of states, of a democratic society. And I think I would approach DeFi in a similar way. I'm not believing in the independence of DeFi, as I didn't believe 25 years ago in the independence of cyberspace. So some key social order functions need to remain in the hands of legitimate regulators, but as I said before, I think regulators should also become innovative as business people, and we cannot anymore work with the old tools.
So what I see here is that in DeFi solutions, we have very often the use of a governance token. So what is a governance token? So the token you own gives you the voting right. And then you have a whole governance layer where you have like hardened community channels where you can go inform yourself, where you can go and discuss with other community members. And then you can actually write down a proposal and the community then will vote on that proposal. And everyone who possesses governance tokens can actually influence the voting there. Now, Bitcoin was one of the very first that had a governance sort of set up. However, you don't have a governance token and therefore you don't have weight. So it's just a community that sort of discusses it out. And it gets heated discussions back and forth. In DeFi, we have seen many examples where a governance layer works really well. And those DeFi protocols that have a governance layer with a governance token, you can more or less compare them a bit with how Switzerland is working, where you can also collect some signatures and then call for a vote. And whenever a DeFi application is long enough out there in the dirt and has some history and people start trusting it, I think a governance solution is the thing to go forward. And also what we're seeing getting a lot of steam is so-called decentralized autonomous organizations, or in short, DAOs. I actually believe that a DAO is a far better construct than a normal company with a CEO, simply because you have then you have the whole community of the token owners incentivized to make the best decisions for that protocol to move forward. And it's not just one person with an ego that protects his interest. So I believe that over the next decades, DAOs will replace companies.
But to be a little bit critical, Mark, then you have to somehow secure that voting is done on the basis of reasonable structures. On the one hand, voting should not be biased, for example, because only less than 1% of the people using DeFi are actually casting the vote. You have to see that you don't have disinformation, which leads somehow to wrong decision makings, and we could possibly also now include Thorsten in the discussion. What about behavioral biases in preparation of voting? I mean, I'm not at all against voting tokens, but the problem is not solved by just having them.
Good point. I guess Thorsten, yeah, please.
Yes, I want to add some other part in the discussion. So now the innovation is going that rapidly that it's very hard to coordinate on one solution, right? So we have had cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin at the beginning. Now we agree that Bitcoin is no longer the best protocol which you can have, but there is still a network effect. Many people are still trading with Bitcoin. Now we have decentralized finance, and Mark mentioned some innovations there. So this is not compatible with the idea that people have to coordinate themselves, right? So if you now coordinate on one thing and in 2 years from now it's already a bad solution, so how can we solve this network problem when we have these rapid innovations? So when can we say with good trust, so this is now a solution which we can coordinate on for the next 5 years, let's say? So that's a question, not a solution, a question.
A very valid question, definitely. Let's just find out. I mean, what kind of movement do we have then in the future? We're currently discussing, we need DeFi. Will we end up maybe in the end back to CeFi? If we let's talk about this Libre Facebook stablecoin thing where the states say, well, no.
The question was, when shall we coordinate? So when shall we say, okay, now big society, maybe the Facebook society should coordinate on this solution, right? Maybe it's too early, maybe it's too late. So I think it's hard to say when is something ripe or ready to be coordinated on so that we can form a network.
I just repeat the question. Well, when is it the right time for a company to form a regulated or a not regulated product which can lead to a specific state for the civil society. Like, again, let's do that on the example of Facebook and Libra. It didn't turn out as a successful thing here. Why not? What needs to be done there or what needs to be changed to lead it?
Well, I think it was quite successful, no?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because it's I don't know, $90 billion capitalization, so it seems to have been rather successful. I'm not sure. I think I may want to edit the question a little bit. Let's say that we probably don't, or we surely don't have the answers where this is going. And maybe if I can pick up on Rolf about the regulators. Rolf, you said the regulators will need to adapt, and the laws, of course, will need to adapt. And I think is maybe one possibility, and I'm just describing one scenario. I'm not saying it's going to happen or it should happen. Is that maybe the regulators and the laws, not just the regulators, but the laws, will not be able to totally catch up and grab DeFi the way they have grabbed or handled or managed decentralized finance, maybe. And in which case it will have to adapt not just in how it deals with it, but also it will have to adapt to the extent with which it deals with DeFi. So I'm thinking, and I'm just thinking loud here, and I'd love to have other people's view then, that maybe the regulators in the future will have to partially give up on some of the current important things like AML and KYC and investor protection. And we all know that it's very, very, very simple, and we've heard that for the past, I don't know how many years, that let's say at least AML, KYC and investor protection, we all know the public goods that we're trying to protect and the dangers and risks we're trying to protect the public from. And we've heard it makes a lot of sense, and the terrorist financing and this and that, and it's all good and clear. But what if it just is not possible anymore to protect these public goods? Like, we can't protect all public goods at all costs, which is partially what we're actually trying to do with AML and KYC, arguably. And maybe the costs go further than actually the value of the public goods that we're trying to protect. So what happens if that is no longer possible? We'll have to not shift a bit, but dramatically shift our societies and the regulators' view and how we protect and at what cost we protect public goods. So let me make this more clear. What if we can no longer say we can KYC everybody? I know we want to, but what if we can't anymore? And then, I don't know, maybe your views I'd love to have. Okay.
Well, perhaps very shortly, and just linking your response to the original question with Facebook, notwithstanding somehow the capitalization, I have the impression that Libra was somehow an example which has shown that regulators still can intervene. At least politicians wanted to intervene, and French finance minister, German finance minister heavily opposed the stablecoin concept. And of course there were good reasons to say that the stablecoin concept of Libra had some flaws. But finally, somehow the original project has not been realized, and what remains is maybe a 10% part of the original project. In this case, somehow regulation was really functioning. Whether it was a good move or not is a completely other question, because somehow this whole stablecoin world has very much lost momentum. And if we now link to DeFi, I would say the more we have decentralization, the more it will become difficult for regulators or for the law to really impose prohibition. I mean, that's the strongest legal means which law does have, namely prohibition. And yes, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not necessarily a friend of too much prohibition. And insofar, I think it would be good to have a little bit more technological decentralization. This would force the regulator to think somehow of the realistic possibilities to intervene and to accept that at some instances it is not possible to intervene and prohibit certain activities.
So yes, so I agree with that. And on the risk of talking in headlines, the first thing I think regulator need to realize, and then I think they'll speed up, is, you know, the least good technology or the worst technology for AML is paper money. Right? I mean, laundering money, the easiest way is paper money, and KML and everything, it's cash, right? So, you know, when you think of that, then you can also start to think about technology is actually a way to improve things. Yes, right now, you know, you can also hide a lot of things, but if you get it right, you may get it very right. That's... Go.
The question is right, no, how to define right.
No,
is right
for
to
sure.
implement
But
AMC and KYC all the way. Maybe that's not what we want in the end. No, it's totally doable. We can have that.
Yeah.
But that's not a utopia. That's more a dystopia.
Fair point. My other concern is one of investor protection and how much society, or in the future, we believe that swarm intelligence, that, you know, what Mark is mentioning, is a better way to protect investors versus, you know, a bank, a rating agency, a government saying, you know, this is only for qualified investors, you need to understand your risks. And I do see a big challenge with that, right? I mean, there's a lot of investors who are not risk savvy enough to do risky investments. And I think as a society, you have a responsibility to help. Right, and that to me is one of the big challenges of DeFi.
Can I be a bit pushy and then I'll shut up? Yeah. But I tend to talk too much. But we talk a lot about investor protection. It was one of these goods that are so easily explained. No, and what do we want to? I think some of you are really young, no. So we want to protect the youngest beyond that. I'm saying this. Some are old, yeah. We want to protect you from investing a large part of your assets into a stupid scam. That's investor protection. But you're totally free. You're absolutely free to take all your money and buy, what do you buy in Stuttgart? A Mercedes, no? When you're 20 and then have a long-term lease and waste all your money, on a Mercedes and then maybe have an accident the next day because you drank and that nobody protected you really from that. And then all your money is gone too. So I think we also have to overthink investor protection as a public good, because you can't invest $100 into a scam. That's very nice, so you can't do that. But you can waste thousands into much stupider things. So yeah, we have to think twice.
But you can burn paper money.
Well, the only thing that I wanted to say is perhaps the only one reasonable level at which regulation can go, or overseeing actors can go, is really ensuring that decentralization is actually taking place. I think that one thing that was mentioned before is, even if you have a DAO or something like this governed by some tokens or some incentives, you really want to ensure that the information that is being conveyed to the stakeholders, allow them to take decisions, is fair, but also as well that the distribution of voting power is something that allows you still to call it a decentralized system, because there is a tension that is ever existing in these cryptocurrency crypto economies, which is the tension between the market forces that lead continuously to centralization of factors, increasing inequality of wealth and so on and so forth, that eventually may lead to non-decentralized solutions, even if you are aiming at them.
So there's a good solution. that can sort of move the needle a little bit on the inequality thing, because what you just described is that those people that are in early, or that those people that have a lot of money that can buy the governance token and then therefore control all of it, that's obviously a problem. But Vitalik Buterin himself has published numerous publications around a solution called quadratic funding. So what quadratic funding does, it's sort of helping to squeeze the inequality level. And the way it works in a very, very simplified way is that a person who has a wallet that has a lot of money in it goes and does an investment. He doesn't get $1 back on a dollar he puts in. A person who is poor, who has very little in his wallet, he puts only $1 in and he gets $1 back on his investment. And that's a very simple way of narrowing down this problem that we have in all of our financial systems today. And blockchain is the technology to sort of enable this. And we're right now seeing some very innovative solutions popping up that enable quadratic funding solutions.
I was exactly thinking on quadratic voting as well, Mark. Thank you for explaining it for me.
Okay, perfect. I would also ask you and as the participants to pose questions to the guys on the panel. I guess I
actually do have a question. Hello. So this question is more for the whole panel. Do you think cryptocurrency will ever not be tied to fiat currency? Or any crypto for that matter? As far as its value and things of that nature. I see a lot of, puzzled looks up there, so I hope I'm framing my question right.
So in terms of the exchange rate is not tied to the US dollar, but basically fiat ceases to exist in that case. In that,
I wouldn't know. I don't think in that term. I just mean because crypto. So let me use myself for an example. So I own Bitcoin, and every day I'm checking how much the value of it is.
Yeah.
Today it was worth 53,000, something like that.
Yeah.
But then tomorrow it could be worth 60,000. Tomorrow it could be worth 70,000 in US dollars. So what I'm asking is basically, will there ever be a time where cryptocurrency as a whole, regardless of what type of coin it is, will its value be predicated on the value of predicated on fiat currency? So the US dollar, Canadian dollar, Swiss franc, the euro, will there ever be a time where that won't occur?
but then basically we're saying, will there be a new benchmark?
Basically,
Okay.
yeah.
So basically, this is the wet dream of everyone who is holding Bitcoin for his dear life, right? That Bitcoin gets to mass adoption and everyone has it, so it doesn't need to be linked to a quote currency, and therefore it's not volatile anymore. So as long as Bitcoin grows, this won't happen. If there will be ever a time that it can't grow anymore, that could happen, in my point of view.
I would not agree to this because you measure it in terms of dollars because you can buy goods with dollars, right? So when you can buy goods with Bitcoin at a stable price, then you might switch to Bitcoin. But as long as you cannot universally buy goods with Bitcoin, why should you measure the value in Bitcoin?
Yeah,
but ultimately people want to consume, right?
That's what I meant. When it's not going up anymore, it's actually achieving to be a currency that you use to buy for goods. But there's also a big disadvantage in this if you have a global currency and you can't even out stronger and weaker economies. So I don't think it would be a good solution for Bitcoin to be.
No, I don't think so either. But basically, what my point was doesn't that sort of devalue the whole premise behind DeFi? if it's tied to a fiat currency, which people are essentially what it is people want to find an alternative way to make transactions, and if it's tied to a fiat currency, doesn't that in some way, shape, devalue the whole premise behind DeFi?
Well, I don't think so, and it could be linked basically to anything. No, it doesn't need to be linked to fiat, by the way, like a unit of a barrel of oil or whatever. This could as well be a stable coin. It could be anything behind it. And just saying, probably to this form of adoption, there's a Swiss insurance company that is actually having a project where you link your mortgage to a cryptocurrency. That's already a good adoption, I believe.
Sounds dangerous to me.
I mean, it's just maybe going back to older Bitcoin discussions, and I went into Bitcoin in 2011, so I'm one of the OGs. No, I think we when you say tie and link, no, these two English words are, I think they're a bit misleading, because it ain't tied and it ain't linked. No, it's just there's a thing and there's another thing, there's another thing, and then people make a market out of. So if I say this is a started bottle of water, and then what's the exchange rate to apples, is basically asking you, Patrick, how many apples would you give to this bottle of water? It's not a super useful pair, but it's a pair. And then if you have a lot of apples and you're thirsty, you'll give 3 apples for this. If you don't have any apples and you have water, you'll say, I don't give you any apples. No, so it's not linked. No, there's no link, there's no tie. People just, if they have a lot of apples and they don't have water, they will give apples for water, and that's the exchange rate. And it varies. So, yeah.
Further more additions to this question, or no? Any more questions? Yeah.
I have a question to Professor Hens, because the first sentence was, he said that the difference between centralized finance and decentralized finance is that, do I trust people or do I trust algorithm? So I don't see this big difference, because if you look to a bank, there is also a lot of software running. And so for me, there is not such a big difference. So why, Professor Hens, why do you say that if you think about today, it's you fully trust people? Because in fact, I think it's not like that at the moment.
So my colleague Rolf Weber might correct me, but when I deposit money with a bank and the IT system breaks down, still the legal counterparty is the bank, right? It's not the algorithm.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I mean, you mean there is another responsibility, so...
Right.
Okay, so that's the difference, okay. Yeah, but I think that's also possible to realize with decentralized finance if there is the right laws for that. So, I mean. But
who would be the, let's say, the legal party ultimately when the algorithm breaks down? So I deposit money on a decentralized lending platform, whatever, and then the algorithm breaks down. So who can I sue that I get back my money?
No, that's a good question.
Okay. So the nature of the transaction becomes totally different, right? So if you deposit money into a bank, the bank holds the money and the bank controls the money, and the bank can do whatever it wants with that money.
And I can take them to court.
Will make some money. Yes, that's possible. In a DeFi protocol, there is no way for the developer to go and touch your money. Because you are the holder of the key, and only you decide if the money is in there or if the money goes out.
No,
there's a really big difference.
That's not my point. My point is, when you write programs, I studied informatics some time ago, you make mistakes, right? So who is responsible for this when the money is lost, not intentionally, but by mistake?
Yes, so that's a really good question, and it varies, of course. So many DeFi projects have, let's say, general terms out there that say your keys, your risk. It needs to be defined by the regulators. It's not clear yet. For now, if I'm using a DeFi protocol, I'm making sure that it's audited by a third party, that it's actually audited by 2 well-known third parties, and that they say the protocol is safe. Otherwise, I'm not putting money in a DeFi protocol.
So it's a good suggestion.
One thing that comes to my mind, because I think there was some problem with Compound. There was an update of this protocol, and I think there was some failure. And in this case, I think the foundation behind Compound gives the people some tokens to solve that problem. So in this case, the foundation of Compound, feels responsible for that. So I think that's what comes to my mind when you ask who's responsible for the money. So I think that's one example how it could be. I think you heard about that. So,
but if there is a foundation in the background, then there's something which can be regulated, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's not totally decentralized.
Okay, one last question, or do we have from the YouTube audience? No, okay, today. Then I guess we can move on to a more freely discussion with wine and apero. And I'd like to thank every one of you, as well as in the Zoom session here, Torsten and Mark especially. And I'd like to thank you in the audience for listening this evening to a fruitful discussion. And well, we have no solution, I guess, for the for the answer on the regulations or the future. But I guess we will find some answers in drinks and food next to here. So thank you, everyone. And I'd like also to tell that there are representatives of cantons, especially from Zug here, right? So if someone likes to move to, and as well from St. Gallen, right? Sorry, and likes to move to Switzerland, to the Crypto Valley, especially as told from Olaf before. I guess there are nice contexts to match tonight. So thanks everyone, and have a nice evening.